Hello, my name is Sophia Sutliff, and I am a student at Fresno State working on my master's in reading. I would like to present an author study for Patricia Pollaco. Patricia Pollaco was born in Lansing, Michigan in 1944. She moved to her grandparents' farm in Union City, Michigan after her parents divorced at the age of 3. Her father also moved back in with his parents, and she would spend summers with them. She had a very special relationship with her grandparents, and their influence is seen in many of her books. In 1949, after the death of her babushka, she and her mother moved to Florida for 3 years and then to Oakland, where they remained. In Oakland, they were surrounded by people of many different ethnicities and religions. This also greatly influenced her writing. As a child, Patricia Pollaco struggled in school. She felt dumb and was often teased. She didn't learn to read until the age of 14, when her teacher recognized that she had a learning disability and was able to get her the help she needed to learn to read. She eventually caught up with her peers and went on to college and now has a PhD in fine arts. She was a gifted artist from a young age and grew up listening to her grandparents tell stories. Her mother's parents were from Russia and the Ukraine, and her father's parents were from Ireland. Listening to their stories helped her develop a love for storytelling. However, it wasn't until the age of 41 when she started writing and illustrating books. She now lives back in Union City, Michigan, in a renovated farmhouse where she continues to write and tell stories. One of her greatest influences was her grandparents and how her grandmother would tell her stories. I would like to show you a short clip that shows in her own words about how her
My
grandmother
grandmother,
influenced
she was the
her.
penultimate storyteller. She was from Russia, actually from the Ukraine, Bielorussia. She had a thick accent. And every night she used to tell us tales because when I was young, televisions had been invented, but they were very expensive. And our family was poor. We couldn't afford one. So she used to do what she called fire talking every night. She'd put a fire in the fireplace. She'd pop popcorn. She would make fudge if we were really lucky. She'd pick snow apples fresh off from the tree outside of the kitchen. My brother and I'd go in with our little bowls, and she'd put wedged apple and popcorn and fudge in the bowl, and she'd say, "Go in living room because now I'm going to come in and fire talk to you." And we did. We'd go in and sit down, and she would explode into story. And we heard her stories thousands of times. And the beauty of telling, or even reading for that matter, but telling especially, is watching the person's eyes that you're telling the story to. And if their eyes get bigger, you add stuff to the story. And she certainly did. I do know whenever she finished a story, my brother and I would always lean into her and say, "Okay, that story you just told, is that a true story?" And she'd look at us over her glasses and say, "Well, of course it's a true story. But it may not have happened."
Patricia Pollaco grew up with a lot of influences in her life of parents who would tell her stories, and although she could not read until the age of 14, she grew up with a rich sense of what stories were. She has written quite a few books. I have listed many of them here. One of her first books was Meteor. She also wrote several books like The Keeping Quilt, Babushka's Dolls, I Can Hear the Sun, um, The Trees of the Dancing Goats, Mommy Say Shh, The Junkyard Wonders, which is also a true story about how she grew up in special education. She's had many awards. One of them was an International Reading Association award, as well as Parent Choice Honors and many other awards. One of the first books I would like to talk to you about is a true story called Thank You, Mr. Falker. Thank You, Mr. Falker is a true story about how Patricia Pollaco learned to read. As a young child, she was eager and excited to go to school and learn to read. She started out full of hope, but as the other kids moved on to harder readers, she remained. After her grandmother passed away, she moved to California and hoped for a new start at school. But the new school wasn't any better. She still struggled to read, and the children teased her and called her dummy. When she goes into 5th grade, she is overjoyed when her new teacher, Mr. Falker, recognizes her artistic ability and calls her brilliant. When he notices her struggling to read simple words, he asks her to stay after school. He tells her that she is smart. She just doesn't see numbers and letters the way others do. He promises her that he will teach her how to read. He works with her along with a reading specialist teacher every day after school, and soon she is reading. Mr. Falker has given her the greatest gift of all, the ability to read. She spoons honey onto a book cover and tastes the sweetness, just as her grandfather had done for her when she started school. She remembers his words, "The honey is sweet, and so is the knowledge. The knowledge is like the bee who made the honey. It has to be chased through the pages of the book." This touching story develops characters fully and gives us a window into little Tricia's life. Although her grandparents only play a small role in the book, they are developed into rich characters. The grandfather placing honey on a book and telling her that she has to chase knowledge through the book like a bee is an especially strong image. Her grandmother is also developed as she talks about how they would lay on the grass together and talk about how the stars were holes in the sky, and one day she would be on the other side where the light comes from. Mr. Falker is also well developed as a kind teacher who notices her artwork and helps her when students bully her. This book uses rich language and complex sentence structure and stands up to the Common Core recommendations for books with text complexities. It is also a story that many students with learning disabilities or students who have been bullied can identify with. The next book I would like to share with you is Thunder Cake. This is a true story about how her grandmother helps her overcome her fear of thunder. The grandmother finds her hiding under the bed during a thunderstorm. She tells her that it is perfect weather for baking a thunder cake. She teaches her to count after the first strike of lightning until she hears the thunder to tell how far off the storm is as they set off to gather the ingredients for the cake. She gathers eggs from mean old Nellie Peckhen. She gets milk from Kit Cow. She walks through Tangleweed Woods to the dry shed to get chocolate, sugar, and flour. Last, she climbs up the trellis to pick 3 overripe tomatoes and some strawberries. The storm draws closer as they make, bake, and frost the cake. As they sit down to eat the cake, the storm is in full force. Her grandmother explains how brave she was to gather all the ingredients, much too brave to be scared of a noise from thunder. In the end, she realizes her grandmother is right. When the thunder roared above us so hard it shook the windows and rattled the dishes in the cupboard, we just smiled and ate our thunder cake. From that time on, I never feared the voice of thunder again. Thunder Cake is an endearing story of overcoming fears. The storyline is something many young people can relate to. One of the things that draws you into Patricia Pollaco's books is the illustrations and imagery she creates with her words. The setting is so real in both her pictures and words that you find yourself wishing you were having a large piece of thunder cake with them while listening to the sounds of rain and thunder. Patricia Pollaco also uses many descriptive words in her writing. For example, she uses croaked, cooed, and exclaimed, among other words, instead of said. Her attention to detail adds to the charm of the story. For example, she vividly describes how her grandmother looks for the thunder cake recipe. Her worn hands pulled a thick book from the shelf above the wood stove. "Let's find that recipe, child," she crowed, as she lovingly fingered the grease-stained pages to a creased spot. She is a very talented illustrator in both pictures and words, drawing us in and inviting us to stay a while. The next book I'd like to share with you is Meteor. This was Patricia Pollaco's first published story. This enchanting story tells about the day a meteor landed on her grandparents' farm. The surprised family goes out to see the falling star that has landed literally right in their backyard. Word spreads from person to person. As it spreads, the story becomes crazier and crazier. Soon everyone in town is coming over to see the meteor. Soon the farm becomes a carnival of meteoric events. People are making meteor popcorn and meteor lemonade. The band plays, and there are even hot air balloon rides to see the meteor from above. Scientists arrive to study the meteor and declare that it is a genuine meteorite. People who touch the meteor claim that it has special powers and helped them do things like play the trumpet better or bake the prize-winning pie at the county fair. As folks left the farm that day, they all felt special. They were changed somehow, inspired by the act of touching something that had flown across the galaxy. What makes this story all the more endearing is that it is true. The meteor did land in Union City, Michigan, right in Patricia Pollaco's grandparents' yard. It remained there until it was turned into her grandmother's headstone, where it remains to this day. Meteor is a joy to read. The book exudes excitement in both pictures and words. I love the way she describes the word of the meteor landing spreading and how the story changed as each one relayed the information to the next. She uses a lot of dialogue in this book, and it serves to showcase what an important event this was for the whole town and what the event meant to each of them. As always, Patricia Pollaco's rich use of language really makes this story come alive. I loved her description of the scientists in the middle of the book. The scientists looked thoughtful, scratched their heads, and wrote down lots and lots of data. They measured, pondered, quizzed, and figured. The crowd leaned closer as the chief finally spoke. "Yes, sir, that there is a genuine meteorite." Many of Patricia Pollaco's books lend themselves well to literature circle questions as well as writing prompts. And thank you, Mr. Falker. Some of the literature circle questions that I had suggested were: what influence did Trisha's grandparents have on her? Why do you think Eric teased Trisha? Why do you think other children tease kids that are different? Do you think Trisha's idea to hide under the stairwell was a good strategy to avoid being bullied? If not, what would you have done? What character traits make Mr. Falker a good teacher for Trisha? What does it mean when it says, "Knowledge is like the bee who made the honey, it has to be chased through the pages of a book"? One of the writing prompts I had suggested was to write a thank you letter to a special person in your life that has helped you in some way. In summary, I would like to say that I chose Patricia Pollaco because she was an author I had seen featured in this class. I had read The Keeping Quilt before, and I was intrigued to learn more about this gifted writer and illustrator. What I found was an author I fell in love with. First of all, her story of being a struggling reader and not being able to read until the age of 14 is incredible. To overcome her learning disability, earn a PhD, and go on to become a famous writer is a story that can inspire many struggling readers. I also fell in love with her writing and illustrations, especially in the stories that bring her childhood to life. She has a very special relationship with her grandparents, and you can see the history of storytelling taking shape in the pages of her books. She has a gift for making the story come alive with her words and illustrations. Her use of rich language and vivid imagery make her books a good choice for read-alouds, not only because they meet the Common Core requirements for text complexity, but also because they are stories that students become enthralled with. I hope you enjoyed my summary of Patricia Pollaco, and I hope you have the opportunity to read some of those books with your class. Thank you.